Hi, I'm Micah Brenner. I'm the media technician here at the Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business. Today I'm here to talk to you about how to use the Canon 90D. First, let's get acclimated to the Canon 90D by taking a look at the body, the lens, as well as some of the features that it has to offer. Starting on the top of the camera, you'll see quite a few options that allow for customization. Let's start on the left-hand side. Here you will find the on and off switch. Above the power switch, you'll find your mode wheel. This is your selection tool that will allow you to navigate between various manual settings, as well as built-in auto settings that have already been programmed for different genres of photography. In order to adjust this wheel, simply push the release button in the center of the dial, and while holding it down, navigate the dial to the choice of setting. On the mode wheel, you'll first see a green A. This is dedicated to full auto. This means that any scenario you go into, the camera will do its absolute best to try and accommodate your environment and scenario. We will talk more about this later on in the video. The next mode is scene mode. This is an auto setting as well. However, in this mode, you will be able to navigate throughout various scene options. By doing this, you will better assist the camera to depict what your environment may require in regards to specific settings. To navigate through these options, simply tap the Choose Scene button on the back display screen. Once in any of the following modes, you can press the Q button on the back of the camera, and this will allow you to further customize your desired settings. Here you will find Portrait mode. This mode offers an auto enhancement that will allow smoothing of skin, artificial blurring of the background, and allows the camera to adjust tonality, which will help the subject stand out more. Group photo. This mode allows the camera to remain flexible with its focus, as there will be more than one subject that you're capturing. This mode is also great for making sure that in a lineup of people, although staggered in depth, will remain sharp, allowing everyone to have the same priority. Landscape. The biggest benefit in this mode is that it will allow your depth of field to stay equal, meaning if I'm taking a landscape photo of a mountain scene, I am not going to have the foreground or background blur, but rather the entire image, wall to wall, should be sharp just the way your eyes naturally take it in. Sports. When shooting fast movements such as a football game, waves rolling into the beach, or a child playing, sports mode will allow the camera to automatically adjust the shutter speed to compensate for this movement. Without that compensation, you'll capture motion blur, as the shutter will not be able to keep up with the movement of your subject. Kids. This mode allows the camera to keep up again to fast movement, changing depth of field, and also it'll allow you to shoot in continuous frames. This will allow you to keep up to your subject no matter the speed. Panning. In panning, your camera is ready to move and focus with you. It is expecting that it will be focusing on a subject that will be changing throughout the shooting duration. For example, if I am photographing a car driving by, within the setting, the 90D will allow the camera to continually focus and continually shoot until I let go of the shutter button. Close-up. This mode promises to assist with close-up shots of small subjects such as insects, flowers, etc. Please keep in mind that you are limited to the focal length based on which lens you are using. For example, if I'm shooting the inside of a tulip bulb, I could use a proprietary macro lens such as the available Sigma 105mm. This will allow you to get right inside of the subject and show great detail, whereas the 18-55 lens will require you to keep roughly 5 to 6 inches away from the subject before proper focusing occurs. Food. In this mode, the camera will offer a more saturated and vivid color output, allowing your images to look fresh and vibrant. The next three scene modes are candlelight, night portraiture, and handheld night scene. Each of these allow the camera to enhance settings for low-light imagery. By having these in place, your images will appear accurate to what your eye sees, as well as alleviate grain or digital noise. Lastly, in the scene category, is HDR backlight control. This mode allows you to keep detail in both bright and dark areas of high contrast, meaning if I am photographing something or someone who is underneath of a tree in the shadows on a very bright afternoon, this mode will automatically depict the necessary exposure settings to retain the environment around me, as well as keep the brightness of the day, without an overpower of one or the other. The next mode on the dial is Creative Filter mode. Once again, by tapping the Choose Filter button on the back screen, you'll be able to navigate through various built-in digital filters, such as grainy, soft focus, fisheye, water painting, etc. Please keep in mind that these filters do affect the final image that is saved onto your memory card. Meaning, if I select fisheye and then take a photo, there is no way to convert that photo back to a normal image later on. Therefore, make sure that you change your settings once you are finished in this mode for future use. Next on the mode dial is C1 and C2. These are programmable auto modes that allow you to create a threshold of settings for a specific genre of photography that you may capture regularly. Within each of these, the aperture and shutter settings will be determined by the camera, while you still can manually adjust other settings such as exposure, white balance, and focus settings by simply pressing Q and navigating to your desired setting. Please note, we will be further discussing settings such as aperture, shutter, exposure, and other terminology later on in this video. The next mode is bulb. This mode allows you to keep your shutter open as long as you are pressing the shutter button down. This would be used for occasions that offer insufficient natural light, where the sensor would require the shutter to be held open longer, allowing it to gather as much information as possible. Therefore, shooting fireworks, starscapes, or even low-lit portraits. The next 4 settings are manual settings. Within these options, you will have far more versatility by being able to selectively change your settings yourself in order to accommodate your environment. As mentioned before, throughout the various auto settings, the camera is attempting to do the thinking for you in regards to what settings should be adjusted. Where this becomes a problem is when the camera does not know what your intended outcome actually is, nor the environment, or even the changing variables that could happen in that environment. Therefore, once you become more acclimated with your camera and can provide these settings yourself, you'll have much more success in the end. The manual modes are as follows. M. Manual mode. This allows you to change all of your settings such as shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and exposure. This is the ideal setting once you're fully comfortable with your camera and have practiced shooting throughout various scenarios, as this will allow you to use your camera for its full versatility. AV. This is aperture priority mode. Aperture is the opening on the back of the lens that faces the sensor and allows light to travel through. The setting is expressed through F numbers, such as f1.4, f3.5 to 5.6, etc. On the back of the lens, there are built-in aperture blades that close as you raise these F numbers higher, meaning at f1.4, the blades are wide open and allow a maximum amount of natural light through to the sensor. A lens that starts at 3.5 has a smaller amount of light that is able to get to the sensor and develop your photo. Other changes that this creates in your photo is what is referred to as depth of field. You may have heard of a term called bokeh. This is when your aperture f number is set as low as possible, and when you are photographing your subject, you'll notice that the subject is sharp. However, as the depth of field in the photo goes further back, it's more and more blurred. This is called bokeh effect. It's a fantastic way to highlight a subject as well as use storytelling in photo or video, and is typically the most popular effect used in portraiture. As you are changing your aperture, you will notice that the camera is automatically adjusting your shutter speed. What this is doing is calculating how much light you are allowing your sensor to receive through your aperture setting, and telling the camera that if there is insufficient light, it may require a longer or shorter shutter speed in order to compensate. This brings us to the next manual setting, shutter priority. Just as the name suggests, this puts the priority on your shutter and allows you to select how long of a time frame you require for your shutter to be held open. For example, if I'm photographing an athlete running track, it would require me to raise my shutter speed in order to photograph the runner without motion blur and freeze them in motion. To give you a better understanding of the typical shutter speed thresholds, here are some tips for popular shutter speeds that you may run into. If I want to photograph the Milky Way in the middle of the night, this is referred to as a long exposure, meaning I'm setting my shutter speed for a shutter that will be held open for 1 to 5 seconds, or even longer. This allows the sensor to gather as much information and natural light from the environment in order to develop the photo in darkness. If I am photographing a stationary subject, my frame rate should be around 1/60th of a second. As the subject begins to move, depending on the speed of their movement, this will rise. A setting for a person running, for instance, could be anywhere from 1/160th all the way to 1/250th of a second. This time is essentially calculating how quickly the shutter will close and gather the available light to then process and develop the image. In video, the typical frame rate that you'll be shooting in is preset to 24, 30, 60, or 120 frames per second. In order to properly shoot in these frame rates without distortion or other issues, the rule of thumb is that you double your shutter speed. Therefore, for 24 frames per second, I would then set my shutter speed to roughly 1/60th of a second. Again, similar to aperture priority, in shutter priority, you'll again notice that as you're adjusting your shutter speed, the aperture settings are now being automatically calculated by the camera. As discussed before, this should be something that is closely monitored in order to achieve your desired results. The last manual setting is program mode. This is a semi-auto mode that allows you to configure settings such as ISO, exposure, auto white balance, focal points, etc. While the camera automatically sets your shutter speed and aperture, this can be a handy mode if you are getting started or dabbling in manual settings. It will allow you to trial various scenarios in different environments, however, you are not alone. I would suggest monitoring what settings the camera is automatically setting your shutter and aperture to, as this can help you identify what the average numbers should look like in that particular environment. Moving to the right side of the camera, you'll notice your information readout screen. This screen is a quick reference guide of your current settings. The information that you'll be able to find here is depicted by the buttons above it. As we go through these buttons, we will identify where the information can be found, as well as the importance of each selection that is available. The first button is AF. This allows you to select your choice of autofocus drive mode. The three different options to choose from are one shot. Just as the name suggests, this mode will allow you to press your shutter halfway down and lock your focus on the subject. If the subject moves or you move, it will require refocusing in order to ensure accuracy and sharpness due to the change in distance or depth of field. AI focus. This mode will allow the shooter to focus continually until the subject stops. Then it locks focus. If the subject begins to move again, the AI feature will begin tracking again, following the subject accordingly. AI servo. Servo allows continuous focus tracking and never locks. For example, if I'm photographing a vehicle driving by, I can simply push my shutter button halfway down and focus once, hold my shutter down, and take the photo. As the vehicle drives by, each frame will refocus automatically, keeping up with the movement, and will not require me to refocus. The next button to the right is drive mode. Within this category, you can select whether you'd like your camera to capture one photo at a time, multiple photos, as well as features like quiet shutter mode or built-in timer mode. Next is ISO. ISO in short is the camera's sensitivity to light. And as light is absolutely one of the highest priorities in photography and video, it's very important to always monitor your ISO. When going into your ISO menu, you'll notice the various options ranging from 100 to 12,800. The rule of thumb is that you keep your ISO as low as possible, as long as you are achieving your desired outcome of exposure. You'll notice in the photo examples that shooting at a relatively low ISO will deliver a clear, non-grainy outcome. I was able to keep my exposure where I wanted it to be, despite the low light challenges. However, the photo is more than usable. In the next example, I've raised my ISO to an unnecessary extreme, and as a result, you'll see the deterioration of the photo, as the noise or grain is far more evident throughout the frame. When trialing the ISO settings, as mentioned before, only use what is necessary. If I am shooting a stationary subject that is not moving and my natural environment is offering sufficient light, there should be no reason to boost your ISO above between 400 and 800. If I'm shooting at sunset or inside of a home where light can be minimized, then the ISO may need to be appropriately adjusted to 800 through 1600. Anything requiring an ISO that exceeds these numbers will then be up to the individual scenario. Meaning, if I am shooting a concert and a little grain in the photo will not sacrifice the image, then not a problem. If I'm shooting a wedding and I know that the insufficient light will cause more grain, then I may want to move on to more of an option of using a secondary light, such as a flash. The next button is metering mode. Metering mode refers to the way that the camera measures the brightness of a subject. Based on these results, the camera will calculate the proper exposure to use in order to achieve a properly exposed image. You'll use these various options of metering depending on your environment and the subject that you are photographing. If there is an area of your frame that is appearing as overexposed, metering levels such as evaluative, partial, spot, or center weighted will allow you to balance the frame with the existing area that is properly exposed, bringing your level into the average, and therefore delivering you an overall properly exposed outcome. The button to the right is simply a built-in reference light. This will come in handy when shooting at nighttime or within a venue that doesn't offer sufficient light to see your reference screen. The toggle switch that you will see above this allows you to navigate between your settings and various options. For example, if I'm in the process of selecting my ISO, I would first select my ISO button and then use the toggle switch to navigate throughout the various levels until I find my specific choice of setting. This toggle will play the selective role in any mode that you are in, whether it's exposure, autofocus drive, etc. It allows for the user to make quick changes without missing the moment. Above this, you'll find your autofocus selection tool. Within this menu, you'll be able to select a placement of your focal point. As the Canon 90D is a touchscreen, these choices can be quickly and easily made by maneuvering through the various points on your back screen. You'll see options ranging from single point autofocus, zone AF, which allows you to select a quadrant of points, as well as large zone focal areas. This will cover the entire frame. These choices will be made depending on your desired outcome in regards to subject, depth of field, as well as framing. Lastly, on the top right, you will find your shutter button. This will play two roles. Pressing your shutter button down halfway will allow you to autofocus your camera and confirm that everything is framed and sharp the way you've envisioned. And finally, pressing the button fully down will activate your shutter and capture your image. In the top center of the camera, you'll notice your flash. This can be activated by simply pushing the button located to the left of it with the flash icon. Please keep in mind, as this is the built-in flash, it is somewhat limited in its use. It offers the same flash power no matter what environment or subject, and only one angle, meaning you do not have the flexibility to shape your light, which in most cases is required. If you do wish to trial external flashes, these are located in media services and are readily available. Moving on to the front of the camera. The first thing you'll notice is the protruding lens. This is why the camera is referred to as a DSLR. The acronym stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. The lens is one of the most important aspects of a DSLR, as this is how the subject which you are capturing is translated through the sensor to the memory card. Using the wrong lens in an environment or genre of photography will ultimately result in a poor image and not what you've envisioned at all. As we discussed in aperture priority, your lens option will allow you to not only choose how your depth of field appears, but also allow how much available light you can work with. This particular lens is known as the 18-135. It's more of a walk-around lens and holds the purpose of an intermediate lens. Once you get more used to shooting and start growing your skills, as well as start finding out exactly what you want to specifically shoot, then you'll begin to trial other lenses such as portrait, macro, or telephoto. On the lens itself, you'll notice that located on the left-hand side, there's a switch that says AF and MF. This stands for autofocus and manual focus. The difference is essentially whether the camera is going to focus the lens for you using the built-in autofocus points, or if you would like to manually focus the lens yourself. In most cases, you're going to want to rely on the autofocus being activated, as this will allow you to not have to think about this step, but rather focus on the more important things such as exposure settings, framing, and enjoy the actual creative process of capturing your image. Reasons for using the manual focus would be things like fine-tuning a stationary subject or trying to highlight a specific feature of an item, or in video, doing things like focus pulls or transitions from sharp to blurry. Beside the lens on the left-hand side, you'll find the release button. Pushing this and turning the lens will allow you to detach the current lens and replace it with a different lens. When remounting, simply match up the white squares and twist the lens until it clicks, and you are ready to once again start shooting. Please note, while the lens is off the camera, the inner components of the camera are exposed and therefore vulnerable to things such as dust, fingerprints, liquids, etc. As the sensor in your camera is the most important part of the camera, as well as the most sensitive, be mindful to cover this area while changing your lens as it attracts these contaminants. Moving to the back of the camera, you'll find the menu button. Within this selection, you will find many options that you'll be able to fully customize your shooting experience, as well as perform tasks such as formatting your memory card. Prior to starting your project, make sure that you clear your memory card by formatting. This will allow you to confirm that you have full capacity of storage available, as well as make sure that there are no older files on the card. It is important to note that once you have created any new content on the camera, formatting will permanently delete these files. Therefore, make sure that this is performed at the start of your project or at the end after your files are fully backed up. Please take the time to study your menu and fully realize what the camera is capable of, as this can really make your project a far more pleasurable experience. The next button you'll find beside the menu is Info. This essentially gives you a breakdown of your current settings, what is enabled or deactivated, or even how much room is left on the memory card. The eyepiece to the right is known as the viewfinder. This is where I would always encourage you to be shooting through. As we are accustomed to shooting through phone screens, it is hard to break the habit and use the viewfinder. However, the benefits of your viewfinder are far greater. Shooting through the viewfinder, you will also find that the information such as aperture settings, exposure, ISO, battery life, and even your autofocus settings are all clearly displayed. Shooting through the screen in the camera is possible by pushing the button to the right of the viewfinder, otherwise known as the live view button. However, Doing this, you may run into issues with reflective screen while shooting outdoors. Also, your process of even holding the camera while shooting through the screen versus the viewfinder will cause more shakiness and create motion blur. Lastly, to note, the fact that while you are shooting through the back screen, all the electronics will be running at the same time, this will cause the battery to drain far faster. Located around the Live View button, you'll notice a switch labeled with a camera or video icon. This switch will allow you to select which shooting mode that you like to be in, whether photography or video. When in video, you'll notice that you are only able to use the back screen as your reference monitor, as the viewfinder becomes deactivated. If this causes challenges due to the reflective screen, keep in mind that Media Services has professional reference monitors available that will allow and offer a much easier shooting experience. Next, you will find the AF On button, which is a pre-focusing button. This can be set up as a personal preference. If you'd like to pre-focus your image, using this button, instead of pushing your shutter halfway down, this will work just as quickly and accurately. The button with the asterisk above is the next button, known as the exposure lock. This means that if you push and hold this button while you are focusing on a subject, as long as you are holding it, it will lock in place the exposure settings for whatever light the camera is reading at the moment. This can be quite handy in various scenarios. For example, if I am photographing a portrait session outside and the light is constantly changing due to clouds passing in front of the sun, by simply finding the perfect light and holding this button, I can keep my exposure the same throughout the various photos, instead of bouncing around and changing these settings each time the cloud passes by. The button to the right is the same as the autofocus selection tool. However, this will display your options in regards to single point, quadrant, etc. inside your viewfinder. This allows the shooter to not have to pull the camera away from their face to make these quick changes, and as a result, allows the shooter to remain fully immersed in what they are photographing. This button, as well as the AF On button, will also play a second role, which we'll talk about later in this video. About midway down, you'll find the Q button. This is known as the Quick Control button. Upon pushing this, you'll see the back of the screen, all of your information is conveniently displayed. And after pushing this button, you will be able to use the joystick to the left to then navigate around this screen and make further selections and adjustments. In combination with the joystick, use the selector wheel located here, and once your settings are correct, simply select the Set button in the center. The remaining button on the bottom is the Playback button. While reviewing your photos, you can use the magnifying options for zooming in and zooming out. This will allow you to verify sharpness and other details within your photo. If there are photos that you are not happy with, simply press the trash can and then push the Set button to agree to delete these items. Once you are ready to transfer your work to your computer, simply turn the camera off, open the memory card door on the right side of the camera, push the SD card until it clicks, and remove it carefully. You are now ready to begin your editing process. Now, although this tutorial is designed to help you get up and running using the Canon 90D, if you have any questions about the camera itself or the photography or videography process, please feel free to reach out to stratford.digitalmedia@uwaterloo.ca.